here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned. Immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the Birmingham-based band Balaam and the Angel, because I recently spoke to Jim Morris to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. So this is the interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Jim, it's over to you.
We grew up in the era when, we were really coming into our own musically in the sort of 74, 75, 76. And it was the real first wave of punk rock bands that actually really fired up our intention to go off and write our own music. I mean, you've also got to roll into this, David, that both me, Mark and Des, we were playing anyway before we started to decide that we would do some writing. We were playing working men's clubs in the West Midlands, to all intents and purposes, being what, now would be tribute acts. We were playing the working men's clubs, doing all the top numbers of the day to working men's clubs audiences. So, we were quite well developed musically in terms of our ability to play, by that stage. But, 75, 76 came out. And the first album that really, resonated with me was the First Generation X album. That was an album that really, made me want to write songs that had that kind of energy and that kind of directness. So that's where I come from my own musical kind of sort of background. Yes. And then Patti Smith was another one that me, Mark and Des all took on as like, almost, a talisman person, the person we looked up to, driving ahead with an alternative vision of the way life is and the way music should be. And, that for a long, long time, she was the person that we were kind of sort of checking in on to see what was going on and to gauge our own, development against the kinds of things she was doing.
Yes. So did you grow up in the West Midlands, or were you brought up, were you born in Scotland and then went to the West Midlands?
Yeah, we were born in Scotland. Me, Mark and Des were all born in Scotland. And then just around about the time, or just after the time I went to primary school, my parents came down to Cannock in Staffordshire. My dad at the time was a miner, so there were mines in Cannock, and that was what kind of prompted the move. And and then we grew up in Cannock in Staffordshire. That's where we were educated.
Blimey, that's quite, yes. So how come? And they had three boys.
Three boys, and we had a girl. They had a girl as well. They had the youngest of the family was my sister April.
Right. God, that's amazing. So how come you were also musically driven, because at those stages, I come from a working class background in the countryside of East Anglia. And yes, we played a lot of football. There wasn't many people doing music at that stage. It was almost something that seemed out of reach. How come you were all such a musical family?
Like my dad was just a great pub singer. He loved going to pubs. He loved doing what they used to call in those days free and easies.
Right.
I think they call them open mics now. But he used to go along because he could sing. He actually could sing really, really well. And the first incarnation of us playing the working men's clubs was me, Mark, and Des essentially supporting my dad who was singing, that didn't last for that long. He was sensible enough to realise that wasn't a good look. And we got a young, a girl singer who was similar ages to us at the time, and that saw the kind of growth of that particular part of the career,
Yes.
We did that for got 5 years almost.
Yes.
I went off to college to study classical guitar. I went to London College of Music, and it was around that time. And by that time, it was 79 that Mark and Des went off and pursued working with some other musicians. it wasn't until I came back 3 years after that, so we're talking 82, that me, Mark, and Des, if you like, reformed again as what became Balaam and the Angel.
Blimey, that's amazing. So classical music was your sort of, was not your first passion, but one of your many passions in sort of the musical genre then.
Yeah. I studied at London College of Music. I studied, for a classical music degree, playing classical guitar as my, as my instrument. Piano, of course, everyone had to. You had to do that. And yeah, I
Blimey.
successfully gained my degree after 3 years, and then decided that it was time to come back to the West Midlands area. And I trained for 1 year to be a teacher. And during that time, myself, Mark, and Des started working together again, creating some music. And, 2 years later, we were on the Tube in 1984, and things are really starting to go for us.
Well, it was a good time. And when you were in London in the late 70s, were you sort of going to lots of gigs as well as your daytime studies? Was that kind of, were you on the circuit of watching all the, I don't know, the punk bands, the pub bands, the early new romantic kind of scene?
Yeah. Well, by that time, the 79, when I got down there, it was really the era of the Specials and Madness, and it was starting to become the two-tone kind of, era. So I was going out to the Hope and Anchor and the Greyhound in Fulham and seeing, those bands, seeing those guys. Uh, You know, uh, whilst I was studying classical music, contemporary music was always the thing that was my real the thing that really excited me. So I would always be going out to see bands at the
Yeah.
same time as I would be going to see orchestras, or studying the history of Bach, or it was a really real fun time.
Yes, well, absolutely. And you must enjoy studying and education if you then went a 3-year degree course and then did a teacher training course as well.
Yeah.
Did you get
And then
I guess you would have
and
got a
then and then
grant
I
for all
went
those.
and then I went in to teach for 2 years at a place called St John Wall Secondary School in Handsworth in Birmingham. And at the end of those 2 years, like I say, around about 84, 85 was where we transferred for being on an independent label, because up until then we'd been releasing our own material on what was a Chapter 22 record label, which was all part of the sort of trajectory of people like Pop Will Eat Itself, even the Mission, all bands that had some of their early start offs through the Chapter 22 label that essentially we had set up with Craig Jennings, and the distribution company 9 Mile, who were based in Leicester. And the whole thing started initially with Balaam and the Angel 12-inch singles. That's how the whole process started.
Right. So you were the one of the original people on Chapter 22 Records.
Yeah,
You
we did well with us and Craig and the guys at 9 Mile. We set up Chapter 22 to release Balaam and the Angel material, and the success of those singles attracted the interest of, well, let's say the Mission. First off, they saw the possibility of releasing the first of their records on Chapter 22,
Yes.
and so they came, and we released their first released their first two singles that I can remember. And then as Craig developed as a manager, and he took on Pop Will Eat Itself, all of it kind of developed into that sort of West Midlands scene, that was so important, that became so important.
Well, yes, absolutely. You had Mighty Mighty, who I do remember going to
Yeah.
see live once, who were Throwaway, which was one of their classic sort of indie singles at that stage. And it was kind of interesting
Yeah,
because you mentioned the two, but I mean, it was a very good scene, I suppose, for people developing their kind of music kind of path, even if it was just for the 5 year kind of narrative. But there was like 3 weekly music papers, which was quite important. And then there was the John Peel show, Janice Long, Kid Jensen. And as I
yeah, yeah,
often say, every city and town would have an alternative indie night of some description. So
yeah,
you could get on a little bit of a scene at that stage at the same time.
yeah.
Just going back to the late 70s and early 80s. I mean, we had Thatcher 79, then we had the Falkland War, the miners' strike, Greenham Common. How was it for you then, having a father who was a miner? That must have been a
Yeah,
slightly
I mean, that the whole miners' strike thing was a very interesting time. But by that stage, my father had decided that actually, because of the potential for miners to have very poor health, that actually he would retrain himself, and he started working for Caterpillar as a big metal, kind of lathe turner. So
right.
he retrained at a time when people didn't do that. So, it wasn't typical for you know men of his era to go. Look, if I carry on being a miner, I'm going to die early with emphysema. So I'm going to take a year out of my life and I'm going to retrain so that I can work somewhere else that isn't going to be so catastrophic to my own, my health. So to a certain extent, it's sort of we weren't as embroiled in it as much as we might have been otherwise. But obviously, a lot of his mates were involved who were still down the mine. And, Dave, I find it a really fascinating period in history. Um,
Well, yes,
just what went
absolutely.
on,
It was
what went
quite.
on at that time to completely destroy a whole set of communities that were based around that industry with and often in you know you know as an alternative was just it's just amazing that happens. Amazing in the wrong kind of sense, in a negative sense, rather than kind of like what a wonderful thing. It was just how somebody could take those decisions and leave those people hanging with nothing was just astonishing.
Yes, no, it was. I do remember it just sort of had a big kind of divide in the country. People who were for, against. There was the Scargill character. There was kind of the news was just quite grim at that stage. It was always rioting going on. There
Yeah,
was these battles with the police. I mean, there was, it just seemed very ruthless. And coming from East Anglia, a lot of the farmers were very against the miners and they were for Thatcher. And,
yeah.
at the same time, they didn't see the irony that they would get these amazing sort of, I don't know, payouts and grants from the government themselves and got subsidized quite
But
heavily.
another interesting factor isn't it? I think we weren't in the day where there was social media all over everything. So a lot of the footage, a lot of the things that we now know about what happened, we didn't know. We didn't see the footage of the sort of battles, pitched battles between police and strike and miners. Because those they were kept from us, and there was no social media to reveal that to the people like there is now. I think the country may have took a different view in terms of um, uh, how they saw that, were they to have seen some of the footage that's emerged over the last 2 or 3 decades since then. And you could see exactly what was going on and exactly how terrible things were.
Yes, I know. It was very sort of, it was kind of interesting the way that Thatcher had that sort of hatred towards unions in the 70s, but obviously when she got there in the
Yeah.
80s, she wasn't going to let it sort of beat her this time. She came
Mm.
reinforced with it. But then being part of that world that I was in, which was also that kind of indie alternative world, there was then There was I don't know if you remember the peace convoy or the Travelling Community, and then that Battle of the Beanfield that sort of appeared, and where the
Right?
police had
Yeah,
stormed the field and smashed everyone's buses up, and that was again quite a frightening period of yes, I suppose it's what you see sometimes when the police state starts to emerge quite sort of with a rampant sort of quality to them. It was
yeah,
yes, it was an interesting backdrop to our little sort of indie pop world, wasn't it? Really, sort of playing
yeah,
music.
yeah. To
But
my late teens, early 20s. Yeah,
yes, so when you brought out you brought out 3 singles on Chapter 22, didn't you? In about 1 year,
yeah. Three 4-track 12-inch singles over the course of a couple of years.
and were
We
you
started with
starting to sort of play live much at that stage? Were you sort of getting in the transit van and sort of doing a few gigs around the country?
yeah. I mean, the when I moved back to Birmingham at 82, that's when we started, as I say, getting back together again. Myself, Mark, and Des. We started playing. Um, we started off at a place called Shifnal. Star in Shifnal was a place that used to put bands on, small pub venue. Started there, and clear we would, we had something that people seemed to like, and that transferred, quite quickly over to us playing at JB's quite a lot. We played there on a fairly regular basis, uh, and did really well out of that. And then, as a result of that, we were, starting to play around the country. Um, the first release really helped because obviously, without something that people have heard, you're unlikely to be able to go and play in Newcastle, for instance, because nobody will have heard of you. And being an indie band wasn't one of those situations where you could find yourself being on. I mean, because this was the era where you know bands would be paying to play on tours with bigger acts, and you'd have to bankroll that as an indie band. Running your own label, the money wasn't there to do that, so we had to rely on the record prompting the offers to come and play in places that we wouldn't have otherwise played.
Yes, but then in '85 you get On the Tube, which must have been an amazing sort of bonus really for the band to sort of get some TV
Yeah,
exposure at this stage, because obviously Friday evenings or afternoons, it was a very sort of important part of our lives, wasn't it? And if we had a trusty VHS recorder, we'd always want to record it to sort of
yeah,
watch
yeah.
it again on repeat. So how did you manage to get that gig?
We were playing, and one of the producers had come along because this was a period of time where we were starting. We were in our ascendancy, so people were talking about us. We were getting interviews in, at least in Melody Maker and Sounds, and so therefore one of the producers from the Tube, came and saw us at oh God, I can't remember where it was now, and said, "Yeah, we'd like you to come and play. We'd like to come and play the Tube." And that was just after the first 12-inch EP, World of Light. Because I think what he wanted us to do, I think what piqued his interest, is one of the tracks off of that, I actually play recorder on it. It's
Right.
called For More Than a Day. And I think his thought was that that would be quite unique and unusual for the Tube. He didn't actually say that to us. And what happened was that by the time we actually got to do the Tube, we'd already recorded and released the second of the 4-track EPs. So we actually played 2 tracks off of that instead, And it wasn't until later where he went, I thought you were going to do the one that you play recorder on. I thought that, that was sort of my plan, even though he didn't kind of sort of convey it to us.
Yes. And you worked was this with the producer John Rivers at this stage? Was
Yeah,
he was
correct.
he
Yeah.
was he your go-to? So did you go to Woodbine Studios for your recordings, or was
We
that
did,
some?
yeah, for all three of the all of the first three 4-track 12-inch singles. We went to Woodbine Street Studios,
Yes.
and even when we signed to Virgin, there was a period where we were starting to record that Greatest Story Ever Told album with John as well. Um, but
Mm.
as these things, they decided, the record company thought that actually it was time for us to move someone who at that stage was a more name producer. So they moved us on from that.
Yes, absolutely. So you had
To
Hugh
you
Jones, which
to
is
Hugh Jones.
I think quite a few people I've interviewed have worked with Hugh. They said he was amazing. He just sat there smoking away all day, just terrible diet, but great producer. Did you? What was your
Yeah,
experience with him? Because he's still alive, which is he sounds from his lifestyle quite
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
where
did
do
it
you?
at Rockfield, where Oasis went on to record their album. The you know the and there'd been numerous bands record there, including Mighty Lemon Drops as well. Because there was one stage we were recording there, and the Mighty Lemon Drops were in, one studio, and we were in the other. So it was,
Oh, so the residential studios of Rockfield. Yes, well, it's kind of
yeah,
famous for so many things, isn't it? Including Bohemian Rhapsody and Black Sabbath and Hawkwind, I think, have played there. And yeah, I mean, it
yeah.
was quite something. So did you have all the material written, demoed before you went to Rockfield at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, we were writing, we were writing fast and writing quite a lot of stuff. So we went in there with quite a lot of material, um, and refined it down to the 10 tracks that actually came out as the greatest story ever told.
Yes. So from memory, there's a song you talk about. Is it Size Will Be you talk about on this album?
What's that, sorry?
Is that Size Will Be that it gets a name check on?
Yes, yeah. There's a track called "The Wave." It's sort of like an instrumental track, and there's a whole load of what was at the time really current news sort of chat about Sizewell B and the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, and that's sort of so that was like in the news big time at the time. So it was our attempt to try and sort of reflect on that,
Yes.
over the
So,
top of
so
over the
how
top of
long
what
did
was
you?
basically an instrumental.
Yeah. So how long did you stay at Rockfield? Were you there for a couple of weeks or
Yeah, I
less?
think we were there for about a month.
Right.
In the end.
And what's it like being in a sort of having a place where you're actually on the site that you're recording? Is that quite different than just popping in and going home? Does that create a different energy within the band?
Uh, oh, yeah, I mean, it creates lots of hijinks and messing around. And I guess you you have to imagine that some of that sort of transfers onto the record, in terms of the sort of energies that you've got, and how you're playing. It's you're putting your heart and soul into what you're doing, and living it whilst you're there. So yeah, I guess it's great fun. It was great fun to come from Cannock in Staffordshire, a small mining town, to get the opportunity to be in a studio, which even then was quite well known, because I think the Cult had been in there as well prior to us going in. So it was already starting to have a big name with a big name producer. It was, you know, it's that feeling, lads, we've made it, even though, that's what you think at the time, but you still got a long way to go. You didn't know that at the time. So it was great. It was great fun.
And did that then give you bigger tours to sort of promote it? Did you then start going to Europe and America at this point?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. And we were doing some touring. We'd done some touring with the Cult. We got some touring with Big Country in the UK. And that's sort of, although I didn't necessarily see us as being a match, that certainly elevated the amount of our own, when it got back to doing our own shows. The Big Country crowd took to Balaam and the Angel and came to the Balaam and the Angel shows. And in the UK, that really worked. And then we were touring in Europe, mostly by ourselves, mostly through Germany and Italy. Italy She Knows was one in the top 40 in the Italian charts. Where they flew us out to Milan, and we were on the Italian version of Top of the Pops with Chris Rea. R.I.P. Chris Rea. He was
Yes,
doing On the
absolutely.
Beach, and we were doing She Knows, and they were whining and dining us, and taking us around Italy. It was great.
Yes. Well, it's funny how certain countries or, in Europe will take to a band. I've sort of spoke to people and they go, oh, yes, I know, oh God, there's a few people who went, yes, Italy loves us or Germany loves
Yeah,
us or Spain. But yes, it's interesting how sort of one country will, oh, Shelley Ann Orphan, I think they were big in Italy actually at one stage in their life. And what about America? What was that like? Were you touring with somebody? Were you a support with that on that side of the
yeah.
Atlantic?
So you've got the Greatest Story Ever Told album. Really, really set a mark in the sand for us. We were, established. We were doing well. We were playing places like the Forum in Kentish Town. That was kind of our headline sort of shows. That's the sort of level we were at. We were playing at Brixton Academy, supporting Iggy Pop. Those were that's where we were at by that stage. And we started to record an album that came to be called Live Free or Die.
Yes.
Some of it, yeah, it wasn't recorded by the time we first went out to America, but we went out to America initially with The Mission, and we were playing with them around, club shows around America, all over the place. But because Virgin were a new record label in America at the time, and they had decided that what they were going to do was they were going to take 6 acts from their roster, and they were going to work them really hard in America, and we were one of them. We were one of the 6 acts. So, we were benefiting from the amount of energy they were putting into raising their own visibility by raising ours. So we would be driving into towns all over America, and we'd be on AOR radio. And it was, we would be doing interviews before and after every one of our shows with The Mission, and it was just to get raise our profile ahead of the Live Free or Die album. And it was
Yes.
around that time as well. Mark remembers this better than me because we'd only just demoed I'll Show You Something Special, and he was playing it backstage to somebody, and one of the guys who was responsible for the John Candy film Trains, Planes and Automobiles happened to be there, and he went, John Hughes Company, and he went, that's the track we're looking for this particular part of the film. We're going to take that. We're going to, and that elevated us onto that film. So that was, another sort of, chance happening that drove the band forward in terms of visibility.
God, that's a fantastic thing to be in because soundtracks are such a great way in, aren't they? Well, sometimes in lots of ways, but it must have. Does that sort of equate to like, oh, that's been a good year, kind of, financially? Does that sort of help the band at that stage? Do you get to reap the rewards of being on the soundtrack for quite a famous film from the 80s?
Yeah, the whole of those couple of years were those years where you are in your ascendancy and everything's new and exciting, and everybody's applauding you and wanting to, be part of what's going on because you're the hip thing at the time within whatever field it is. And you can't. That's great. Great times, isn't it? It's like sort of until that curve starts to dip,
Yes.
you're riding the crest of a wave, and I mean, being out in America was eye-opening in many, many, many different ways. Completely different from touring in Britain. It was wilder. It was more rock and roll. It was more vast. You were traveling long journeys. You were, you know, seeing sights that you never thought you would see, in your dreams, and and seeming, things were on the surface very successful. I love the things you do to me. The other single that came off of that was, was a top 10, college and AOR radio station hit. It was all over America. Um, and we were poised. It's that kind of thing. We were poised. We Live Free or Die album. By the time we finished touring with the Mission, and we did another tour with Iggy Pop, and then we did some touring of our own, and then we played with people like LA Guns, and we played at this massive festival, second on the bill to Kiss in New Hampshire. It was like, we're ready. This is the next step, really. I think to becoming like the bands who can maintain for a long period of time their career because they've stepped over into that top 5%.
Well, yes.
Little were we to know that that wasn't going to be what happened, but at that point, that's what we were feeling.
Well, absolutely. Did you then at that point have to start making videos and going on, MTV and things like that? Was that something that
Yeah,
entered the band's kind of world as well? Did you? Because
yeah,
I
yeah,
was always a bit amazed how popular Flock of Seagulls are in America. And then someone said, "Oh, it's because they were on MTV because they were struggling having any video, so they just said anybody got a video, and it was like one of them was Flock of Seagulls, so it got heavy rotation for
yeah.
quite a period of time. So yes, so you were there, and did you get You must have had management at that stage as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were managed by the Stiefel Company, who, are best known for managing Prince and managing Rod Stewart. Uh, yeah, you know, big business management. And they assigned us, a young guy who, had an understanding of where we were at in our career. We weren't managed by Arnold Stiefel himself, obviously, but we were given this guy, and it was all fun. It was, and he would come over. He was born and bred in LA, and he came over to visit us in the UK, and we took him around my mum and dad's house, and it was a real a real clash of different cultures. He was born and bred in LA, quite a rich family, coming round to, essentially a two up, two down, ex-miners council house, meeting my mum and dad, asking my dad if he could have some, a glass of sherry. My dad was like sort of thrown, and I managed to find an old bottle at the back of some cupboard that had some sherry in it that was like Terps by this stage, But that was, that's how it played out. And
Excellent.
yeah, we enjoyed that kind of sort of the two sides of what was going on. The people we were and had come from, and where we were sort of, looking to perhaps, get to.
Yes. Did you have? I mean, there's an amazing video for She Knows, isn't there? Was that one of
Yeah,
your first videos that you did for the band, or was that sort
that
of?
was the first one. That was the Great Story Ever Told one. That was, yeah. I can't remember who did that, but Guy, I mean, he did the next one as well, the Light of the World video. And I mean, he went on to become absolutely massive in the field of video making. He was just brilliant. We got him obviously at the early stage of his career when he wasn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, videos in those days, they cost an unbelievable amount of money.
Yes, I
You're
remember.
talking in '86, £50,000 plus, which was an awful lot of money, to pay for a 4 minute piece of video. It was substantial.
Yes, well, they were quite events, weren't they? Those videos that came out
Yeah,
during that time. I mean, everybody loved them. Did you get, who was kind of directing the style and the image and the sort of general, I don't know, the look of the band? Because your videos are all very dramatic, aren't they? Lots of
yeah,
winds, lots of sand, lots of bits of
yeah.
paper. I mean, it's all very. So
That's us.
did you have a stylist? Did anybody say, yeah, let's try this, let's try that?
No, no, we just went with what we were into. I mean, the CNO's sort of period, we had been guys who had dreamt of being able to afford Vivienne Westwood clothes, because that's the kind of stylist that from Cannock in Staffordshire was like, boy, if only we could ever get to be someone who could buy a Vivienne Westwood, outfits, we'll get them. And so when we got some money, that's what we did. It's like we went into that sort of look and really enjoyed it. And it was partly because um, there was a club in London called Alice in Wonderland.
Oh
I,
yes,
I
I've
don't know
got
if you remember that.
yes. I've got a book on that whole chapter
Yeah.
on that whole history, Alice. Yes, that was the guy who was in. Oh God, he did Spirit in the Sky, didn't he? Was the kind of one of the
Yes.
DJs.
Yeah.
From,
Yeah. And
yes,
and we were more taken by the scene at Alice in Wonderland than we were with the Batcave. If you can understand where I'm going with this kind of
you're more
sort of
dandy than
story.
goth. Yes,
Yeah, yeah. A bit more psychedelic, dark psychedelia, the Doors, man. We loved the Doors at that period in time, and and that kind of sort of look, that kind of look we were generated around then fitted with that where we were at in our heads with that sort of sound and the sound we
yes.
were attempting to kind of make.
Yes. And what was your typical audience then? Were they consistent, your sort of your followers at this stage, or were they quite a gothic
I,
looking?
I, I think we've never had a one style group of people who come and see Balaam and the Angel. We've always had a very mixed group of people who are all part of the different Venn diagrams of, you know, genres who somehow they whilst they may like rock, whilst they may like goth, whilst they may like psychedelia, whilst they may like indie music, somehow there's this kind of group that don't all fit together, but go to Balaam and the Angel shows, if you know what I mean. It's like kind of we, it's never been wholly defined as being all of one particular style group. In my opinion.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of sort of mm, I don't know, Lawrence Llewellyn-esque shirts, aren't there, on some of your
Yeah, well, in those days it was, they were kind of, sort of gravitated into the sort of more kind of biker leather look for the Live Free or Die, and sort of beyond that sort of period, and into the what became the last album on Virgin, which was the Days of Madness album. Um,
So how did Live Free or Die? How did that sort of compare to the first one on Virgin? Would it on the sales front?
yeah, I
Was
mean, I,
were they
I,
pleased with those two?
yes, they were pleased with that, and they thought, as I say, I think by the time we'd got to the end of touring and promoting the Live Free or Die album, it was poised to move to another level beyond that. Um,
And how did you? I mean, one
and
of the things that I noticed doing this show, I mean, you realize how quickly scenes change and that kind of wave of, young people like, I don't know, 15, 16-year-olds who are coming along, aren't they? And they want to discover their band and they think this is brilliant. And then that scene sort of quickly comes and then goes a bit. So most bands have, if they're lucky, have, on a zeitgeist period, aren't they, for a little bit of time. And,
yeah,
I think 5 years of an indie band in the 80s seems to be almost a sort of a consistent number because they have the 12-month honeymoon period. They get a play on John Peel, John Peel session, the transit band around the countryside. Then that first album, things good. Second album, things are possibly going even better by then. And then the third album and the fifth year, it's all getting a bit strange, And also, again, that thing of like a new kind of scene coming on because during that period, for me, 83 to 87 was really kind of great indie pop. It was also the years of the Smiths. And then when they broke up, there was definitely a scene like, all those bands that we all love, like Mighty Mighty and the June Brides and the Primitives and well, the Primitives were still slightly going, but sort of then Ecstasy comes along and that does change the musical
Yeah.
scene quite a lot. So unless you could sort of take the drug and make the sound like the Happy Mondays or the Soup Dragons, you're a little bit, a bit sort of stuffed really, aren't you?
Yeah,
So how
yeah,
did you,
your day got. I mean, I do resonate what you're saying. I think you get your chance in 5 years to elevate yourself to a level whereby you can make that next. You can, if it's possible, to make the next step so that you just then maintain a career after that. We weren't one of those bands who eventually managed to do that. There are a lot of bands out there that don't manage to do that as well, as as we know. That their 5 year chance, the curve starts to drop away. There is a new scene that emerges. There is a whole new different set of bands and a whole new different crowd of younger people. They're not looking to, try and they're looking to do something different. So those bands are out, these bands are in, and it just flows like that. And I think we were a victim of some of that. I think we were a victim of some of the kind of sort of things that uh, unfortunately were happening with the Virgin Company at the time and their ability to be able to continue to press forward in America to push the label, because they had to step back from that, I think, a bit when it came to the third album that we did on Virgin, the Days of Madness album, because they had other things going on in their corporate world that they needed to put the money into. So we weren't getting the same kind of promotion and sort of support that we went into America with in the first place. And that's another one of the things that just happened. It's an interesting thing that happened with the Mission. So you've got the Mission. We're on Virgin Records. It's our first album. We've had the Shino's video out. There used to be a show on a Saturday morning called the Chart Show. Do you
oh
remember that
yes,
one?
yeah, yes.
It used to just play videos. So there we are, lined up to do the next single, the next video. The Chart Show have a fallout with all the major labels in Britain and refuse to play any unless they. I think it was to do with paying money, but pay money or don't pay money, or whatever, royalties or whatever for the plays or whatever, or the record companies was starting to ask the Chart Show to have to pay them for putting the videos on. So they weren't doing any more videos of major acts. However, at that same time, the Mission's first record, which is on chapter 22, they've got a video for it that we kind of sort of paid for, and they're getting played on the chart show, and we can't. We're not getting played. It's like kind of, and they're one of the, well, they're one of a small number of bands. So they would like almost every week there was the Like a Hurricane video on or Garden of Delight video on the
Yes.
chart show, just at the time when we really needed that exposure to kind of help us, kind of sort of move along at the kind of pace we might have done. And
Yeah.
that's not in any kind of way trying to, sort of be negative about the Mission. They deserved the visibility as much as we did, but it's just interesting how things going on in the background can sometimes affect your ability to move forward at the kind of pace you might do.
Well, absolutely. There's that famous story with David Bowie. Suddenly, I don't know, somebody pulled out a Top of the Pops and it was like, can you go down there now and perform one of those songs, which is very famous, Starman, I guess.
Yeah.
And when he said, oh, yes, God, we'll go, and obviously the rest is history. But it is, I guess a lot of people also say it's luck and timing, because a lot of
Yeah,
people
yeah,
sign for a label, they think, oh, we've done it. And then the person who signed them, they go, oh, he's left. It's like, oh, right. Who? And then the next person goes, actually, I don't know who you are and I don't like you. And it's like, okay,
yeah.
we're not going to be successful. It's a bit like that. There's a lot of times where I remember that Petrol Emotion, were like got signed by somebody and then they said, I'm sorry, but Paul McCartney's offered me a job and I think I'm going to have to take it. And they went, oh, right, okay. The guy, I think they were on Virgin, weren't they? That Petrol Emotion, actually.
Yeah, yeah, they were, yeah, yeah.
So I think they also had a bit, and also Rough Trade was having that terrible business problem as well, and things were all going to, Jeff Travers wasn't doing so well at that stage. So there was a bit of a, I don't know, tsunami, or I don't know, some sort of disaster going on in the world, because there was quite a few labels and artists who had product and then they got stuffed because they were just stuck in warehouses. So that was
Yeah,
the end of
yeah.
their career. But then at that stage, when you went to record, your that album, that was around the time when 4AD started bringing out people like the Pixies and Throwing Muses, and there was another kind of interesting scene. Obviously, Seattle started to have a few records, because John Peel was playing a Sub Pop 100 compilation, which had some
Yeah,
great
yeah.
stuff on. So, how were you then sort of thinking about, that album Days of Madness in sort of '89? What was that like, thinking about writing, and
I
what
mean,
sort of.
that was the first album that we actually went out to America to record. You know, I'm reluctant to make it sound like we're chasing the American dream. We weren't. We were, we were on the Arnold Steeple Company. We've done really well in America with "I Love the Things You Do to Me." The record company wanted us to be out there, and we went to stay in San Francisco, and we recorded in the studio that Janis Joplin had recorded in the Tenderloin, and it was, yeah, look, we approached that as we'd approached everything else we'd approached. We were trying to write some good tunes, things that we thought made sense. We were still quite young at the time, so they are the kind of sort of a romantic sort of style kind of lyrics. And yeah, I mean, we thought it was going well. It wasn't like we were struggling to write the stuff. And hindsight's a wonderful thing. Could we or should we have done a different style of album? Maybe we should have done, but we made the album that we wanted to make. The music we made there, you know, I there are some absolute cracking tracks on there. I don't think it's as strong in depth as "Live Free or Die" or "The Greatest Story Ever Told," and I think that might have been part of the issue. Why things didn't keep going upwards and just kind of like plateaued. And then we started to fall away from that point onwards.
Yes, it's very tricky, isn't it? Did you record the whole album in America?
Yeah,
And who was your producer for that one?
Steve Brown, who'd been on the producer on the "Live Free or Die" album, and obviously Steve had done the Cult, and I can't remember who else he'd been doing at that stage. And I think, hindsight again, I think it might have been served us better had we had somebody new who came in with a different approach. But we're the kind of guys we're quite, we like to work with people we know. We're quite loyal to those people that have, showed out for us. And Steve wanted to do it, and we didn't want to get into a situation where, he was being, asked not to do it, so that we could have, I don't know, whoever would have been the other current favourite at the time.
Yes. Were you pleased with I Took a Little? Was that, were you pleased with the singles that came from it?
Yeah, thought "It Took Little" was a good single.
Yes.
There's parts of it, there's parts of the production that I think was just a little too smooth and that wasn't edgy enough. I remember sitting in the car listening to one of the tracks with the guy from the Steeple Company, and when I wrote it in my mind, I was hearing the kind of noise and energy of Guns N' Roses at the time,
Yeah.
and then he played it on his car stereo, and it certainly didn't sound didn't sound like that. And I was like crestfallen, and it was a sort of like, I don't know how to get back into this and make it, because there's a big wheels of industry rolling and all of this stuff, and it's like, I wasn't, I didn't know how me could change, this particular disappointment.
Yes, God, that's quite something as an artist, isn't it? Sort of
Yeah.
realizing this was going to be. So when that album came out, did you tour it? Were you sort of going out and promoting it?
Yeah, we did some shows out in America. Didn't do very much in Britain. By that stage, it's certainly become the era of the indie band era, the bands like Ned's Atomic Dustbin, Pop Will Eat Itself, The Wonder Stuff, they'd kind of taken over the UK scene. They were, they were the bands that people wanted to go and see. You know, we
Yes.
we were touring. We were back to touring. Clubs. We were touring clubs up and down the UK, which was what prompted the decision sort of towards the end of that period to try something different. Because, like I say, we were a little disappointed that it wasn't as noisy and as loud and as energetic as we were hoping for. We'd by the next stage of the career, we were no longer on Virgin. We were on a label called Intensity, and we were given the opportunity to try and go like heavy metal. Even we were like the next album, the No More Innocence album, which was a 6-track, which then became Prime Time. We took the opportunity to a bit like Nick Cave did with Grinder Man.
Yes.
We took away the and the angel, we called it Balaam, and we tried to like sort of knock out something that was like sort of was like really punchy and loud and noisy, and what was taken on by the Kerrang crowd. Suddenly we were getting features in Kerrang and Metal Hammer and papers like that. Which was coming from our starting point, you would never have thought that was going to be the case.
Yes, my God, that's quite a musical movement, isn't it? At that time, or
Yes.
change to deal with it. And also, I always find that when a new decade comes along, it does feel a little bit like, I don't know, a new chapter in a certain way. And did sort of hearing sort of, I don't know, Bleach from Nirvana, did that sort of start to sort of influence your kind of musical direction at all? I just wondered if some of those kind of grunge bands or that excitement of another scene appearing sort of made you kind of curious.
I mean, on a personal level, I've always been excited by the new scene of bands, whoever they are. And yes, they were another group of bands that were making new music and making exciting new music. What you get to a certain extent is you once you have got a particular sound or a particular style that people associate with you, no matter how much I might have liked to have started to become a bit more grungy, it didn't or feel authentic. Yeah, you're almost locked into having to carry on with what you've established, if you know what I mean. I
Yes.
think a lot of musicians get stuck into that sort of routine, don't they? That scenario
Yes. Well,
where
I think you're a bit shocked, really, because if you bring out the sort of the next album, which was like your sound from the previous albums, sometimes the fickle fan is a bit like, oh, it's not as good as that one. But if you were to then do a Jazz Odyssey album, people will be horrified that you've gone in a different direction. So
yes, I
you're a
know, yeah,
little,
I know,
it's a little
yeah,
bit
and
difficult,
you're stuck. And sometimes it isn't because those albums aren't as good as the ones before. It's just that people slide off the their level of interest, and they're getting, sort of caught up in being interested in something else.
Yes,
It's
and I
it's
mean,
it's a it's a it's a terrible dilemma, isn't it? It's that thing. Here we are now. We're back in 2026. We've been playing back on and off, for the last 10 years, doing various different things. To be perfectly honest with you, most of the people don't want to hear us play brand new material. We're forcing them to have to accept that they've got to hear some brand new material, but really they don't want that. They want to hear "She Knows," or they want to hear "I love the things you do to me," or "I'll show you something special," and that that's because people have got you in their mind as being that's what you are. Sometimes you can't change; it's impossible. And neither I sense would you want to be seen to be so much of a musical butterfly that you keep changing your style to meet every new style that's come out. It's
No. Well,
there has to
absolutely.
be something that is you and authentically you throughout all of this.
I guess, yes, you probably can remember when you were younger seeing some bands and thinking, oh, their new album, or this is a new track, let's go to the toilet, let's go to the bar. And you think, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah.
That was that classic thing, isn't it? Well, I suppose people like the Rolling Stones, and people had in their, it's not heyday, but in their latter decades, actually. So then when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
brought out, you brought out Prime Time, which was sort of 93. I mean, again, what was the sort of the atmosphere like or the energy like in the band at that stage? Were you still sort of enthusiastic, or did you know at that stage you were gonna call it almost a day?
Look, there wasn't the level of unbridled enthusiasm that there had been in '87, 88, where where people were knocking on our door wanting us to come and do stuff with them. We were in a completely different situation. We were creating stuff and have to go around knocking people's doors to get even the slightest amount of kind of sort of attention. So yeah, that's a very difficult situation when the tables are turned in that kind of way, and you're
Mm.
having to go out and you're having to try and gain some kind of sort of ground when people feel they've moved on, and you belong to another scene that they're now no longer. That's now not that's been put in the kind of annals of kind of sort of an archive somewhere. That you might dip into once in a while, but you're not going to take much notice of otherwise.
Yes, absolutely.
So, but we went
But
out to make some really loud and noisy music. We achieved that. We enjoyed making that music. That album, I think, sort of is was at the time a much closer representation of what was in my head and what I think was in the head of the band. Me and my brothers. In terms of what we thought we sound like.
mhm.
Rather than the Days of Madness album, which was much more a sound that was a collective of people's impression of what we sound like. And like I say, that sort of disappointment about it not sounding quite as you know energetic and noisy as I'd kind of hoped it would.
Yes. So then did you sort of all come together and sit down and say, "This is it," to quote Jim Morrison, "This is the end"? How does a band finish? How does a band finish? What's that process?
Well, I mean, look, it's three brothers, so it never really finishes. But we sat down one day and talked to each other as we always do because we're brothers, honestly and frankly. And we went, you know, do we want to keep doing this like this, in this kind of way? Is it something that, um, you know, w- you know, this is going to sound really grandiose, but if you'd like to feel that you have some kind of legacy somewhere in the world of music, you don't want that legacy, whatever it might be, however small it might be, to be spoiled by you're suddenly playing the Dog and Duck pub to 10 people,
Yes.
and, oh, look how the mighty have fallen, and to a certain extent, that was looking like that was how it was going to be for a while. So we just decided, something, we're all smart people, there are other things that we can do. We can go off and do those things for a while and let's see what happens. Let's see what
Yes.
happens next.
And did you, I mean, I know that you probably got sort of sometimes put in the same category as other bands from a scene because, everyone likes to sort of put people into sort of certain genres. But did the three of you always manage to sort of keep a good relationship going throughout those years in the band?
Yeah, yeah.
But
I mean, look, we're brothers. We fall out, we
yes.
argue, and we can be quite. Um, it can be quite fiery because you're allowed to have no filter conversations with your brothers,
Yes.
and that used to sometimes amaze people, worry people because they'd see us, almost at blows in the dressing room before a show, and yet 5 minutes later we're on stage, and after the show we're backstage, arms around each other, having a pint and all the, because that's just the way it was as brothers.
Yes.
We grew up in a quite a, we grew up in a council state environment, rough and tumble. That's that somewhere deep within me and me and Mark and Des is we those people still.
Yeah, well, no, it's just that there's been quite a few, famous falling outs and quite a few different versions of bands, aren't there, over the decades? I think at one stage there was 4 versions of the Rubettes. There's 2 versions of Jean Loves Jezebel. There's quite a
Yeah,
lot of different, but you've always managed to sort of there's not you always stuck with one band and not Mark's band or your band or anybody. You've always managed to sort of cope with those little kind of family dynamics.
yeah, yeah, and that's not to say that in the period after the Primetime album and the point at which we decided that we weren't going to keep Balaam and Balaam the Angel going at that point, that doesn't mean to say we didn't go off and do some other work with other people, but we were never going to do the thing of, well, it's Jim Morris out doing Balaam and the Angel songs and calling myself Balaam plus two or Balaam and Jim or whatever.
Yes.
We were never going to do that. If we were ever going to play if Balaam songs, any of us, we were going to do it with all 3 of us.
Which is not, yes, well, that's good. So then what do you do then from the John Major New Labour period? Do you then get a day job, as they say?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
You did that. Did you?
35 years in education. For me, I went started off teaching music in a school in Hackney, and then gradually kept going at that through, head of music, all the different levels of, sort of kind of responsibility. Ended up being assistant head teacher at a big comprehensive school in Tower Hamlets, and whilst also still doing some music teaching in the school as well. And they did that really successfully. Mark went off, and he's basically, developed a career as owning a series of bars in and around Lichfield, Cannock, and Staffordshire.
Blimey, that's
And Des
impressive.
went on to, start up an accountancy firm, which is that both Mark and Des are still currently doing their day jobs. I'm the one who's fortunate enough to have been able to stop having to do my day job about 15 months ago.
Oh, early retirement. It's magic, isn't it? So there you go. So you got to so you got to
Are
deputy
you
head
are
then.
you are you saying that because you're retired as well?
No, not quite. But it's kind of, you're just thinking it would be nice. There are people, I've suddenly got to that age group where people are talking about that, moment where you're just thinking, well, I've been offered the chance. I might as well go. I'll just do it. And, feel a bit weird. I haven't, but I know people who have. And it's that moment you think, my God, it's sort of, this is it. A different moment in life, isn't it? It's just like, wow, I'm dealing with that
No, I
whole,
mean, that's exactly the way to see it. It's the opportunity for me to not have to keep getting up at 5:45 in the morning. Believe me, that was the only thing that was grinding my gears about my job. I absolutely loved working with young people in the school. I loved
yeah.
working, as in this kind of sort of, senior management role. I really enjoyed it, and I would have continued to go on doing it, but it just didn't make sense for me to just keep on keeping on when actually when I look forward to what's ahead of me, I'd like to have the time to concentrate doing the things that I really, really, really enjoy, and that's going out, seeing music, making music, being part of music. and that's, stopping the day job is affording me the opportunity to do that, not only with Mark and Des, but in all sorts of ways. I sing in a community choir, and they,
Excellent.
is one of the other things that I do. Yeah, and
Yes.
sort of. So that sort of take me back to the right at the start when I was at college, and I was in the college choir.
And
So
is that a mixed choir that you're in? Because
yeah,
Norwich has
yeah,
got quite a lot of community choirs, and there's more. Some are more
yeah,
arty than others, and but they're
yeah.
always quite big community numbers, really. Always,
Yeah,
yes.
they're great as a community of people to get together, but it's also, depending on which one you're in, they all have their different kind of sort of approaches. But what I like about the one I'm in is quite highbrow. They do some quite weighty pieces of classical music, and they're actually they're pretty good as well. So
Yes.
it's cool.
That's cool. So when did the it's like the return of the Magnificent Seven. So when did that little moment come where you thought, let's get the band back together? Did you get an offer to play a gig, or were you just starting
Yeah,
to sort of
yeah.
mess about?
No, I mean, the defining moment was there's a guy called Frank Drake. He runs a promotion company called Flag Promotions, and he chased us down and said, "Look, guys, you know, I reckon I can put on, a series of shows up and down the country and have you play at the O2 Academy in Islington at the end of the tour." Um, there's definitely the what you call it appetite for you to go out and do that. And you know, would you let me put it together? And it wasn't like we went, oh yeah, straight away. We were like, okay, well, let's leave it with us for a moment or two. We'll have a think about it. And yeah, that's where it started. So we started with that. We did a tour, 84 to 86, the singles plus, and went really, really well. And that sort of started us off on the trajectory of getting back into being a band again, in between having our day jobs,
Yes. So were you
in between
concentrating
our
on
side hustles.
your Friday, and was it mostly Friday and Saturdays you were playing at that stage?
It was at that time, yeah. So
And what was that?
and
Was
in
what?
my in my kind of sort of school holiday times.
Oh, yes, good point. Yes, I know. It was interesting. I remember just talking to a member of the Australian band, the Hard-Ons, and actually, I thought they were, yes, I had that certain idea what they would be like, but one of them, stayed in university all the time, but would just like, let's really work in the holiday period, and then I'll have to go back to whatever he was studying. I think it was nursing or something, but he just managed to squeeze
Right?
it in, but he kept it together. Whereas in the UK, I think during the 80s, most people would have given everything up to be in the band, whereas some other
Yeah,
countries,
that's
I
right.
think, are a little bit more like, no, I better get my degree, and then yes, once I've done that, I'll then go and do the music
Yeah,
full time. But
but
yeah,
it's also because the ability to be able to earn sufficient money as a member of as a musician in a band has fallen away, isn't it? At that start out level, when we started out, you could sell your records. You would get enough money for it to be feasible for you to be able to say, something, we are earning enough money for us to not have to go out and work. These days, you've got to have a side hustle, it seems to me, at that level. You've got to have a side hustle of some description just to keep, food on the table, or else you just can't do it.
yes, I know. It was a combination. There was the Job Seekers Allowance and Enterprise Allowance schemes that people helped. I think that's why there were so many bands in the 80s. It was those schemes where, and the unemployment benefit was a little bit easier to sort of claim. So you
Mm,
could sort of keep under the radar for a certain period of time before you might have to declare and sort of
yeah,
sign
yeah,
off. And then, but that Enterprise Allowance scheme that government brought in for a 1 year period where you just had to prove you had £1,000 in the bank account and then could just concentrate on doing some music was just brilliant. I think it just helped a lot of people be creative. And also during the 80s, it was difficult to sometimes think about careers and being professional, because it was still quite a divided little country at that stage. And
Yeah,
most
yeah,
people thought there wasn't much of a future. It was all looking a bit grim, wasn't it? And as you mentioned, Chernobyl at one stage as well. There was, and then there was the poll tax, and there was the red wedge period, wasn't there? It was at times.
yeah.
So, there was being in a band, getting in the transit van and doing some gigs seemed a lot of better idea, really. And then hoping for a John Peel session, and
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
that was it. There was no long-term plan, was there? But I think now that, decades later, people are sort of looking back. I mean, record labels like Cherry Red have been putting these great compilations together, or, beautifully compiled about different sort of either cities around the country, or finding the bands, four
yeah,
four albums and a few bonus tracks, and putting these compilations together. It kind of makes it quite groovy, really. I would say.
yeah. I mean, Cherry Red did two compilations of the Balaam material. They did the compilation that became the Sun Family album, which was all the independent release. So you had all the tracks off the Sun Family album and the ones that weren't on the album that were on the 4-track 12-inch singles and some of the other stuff that was around then. And then they did another one with The Great Story Ever Told and all the kind of B-sides and other tracks that were in and around that period as well. So, we've kind of worked with them in the past.
Yes, well, they're just such a. I think they're just such a great record label. I'm sure, you know,
Yeah,
people might have mixed feelings about them, but I don't know. I mean, they do a lot of work and stuff like that. So when you did your tour, then you brought out a live album, didn't you? At that stage, was it
yeah,
on Chapter 22, which was "That's Not the Real World"? So that was
yes.
recorded on your last gig, I guess, the O2
It
Academy in
was. That was recorded at as I say, at the O2 in Islington. Um, and yeah, and that was an attempt to, uh, in a way, to revitalize the Chapter 22 kind of sort of name again as well. Um, we had a guy called Dean Brown who had taken interest in managing the band and uh, wanted to manage the band and wanted. It seemed logical that if we're going to release something, that we could do that under the Chapter 22 label.
Yeah.
And so that's how that sort of took off. So, and it was,
And were
yeah,
you met with
you know,
general enthusiasm at that stage? Was it looking good?
yeah,
People
yeah.
had to sort of, yes, well, this is all good. And then sort of from there, obviously we then have lockdown, which is a bit of a pain. Then what's because obviously you're not going to school at this stage, are you, for a while? Is that
Uh,
when you're starting to think about early retirement during those Zoom calls?
the band being back out and touring wasn't the thing that made me consider whether I needed to stop stop working my day job. That was just something that became clear to me was the thing that I needed to do. These things happen, don't they? You reach a point where you go, it's time to stop and move on. In the same way as it was time to stop Balaam at the end of Primetime album and move
Yes.
on and do something else. The phrase "flogging a dead horse," is comes to mind. But that's. I wish I could think of a more positive one. But you don't want to be doing that forever. You don't want to just be endlessly continuing something when actually you've got the opportunity to take that moment and you've still got the energy and you've still got the capacity to kind of move on and do something new and get the energy out of that as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't because the band had started playing again that became apparent to me. I mean, we had we weren't and haven't been determined to uh, raise our profile much more than we currently are at the moment, if you know what I mean. We are now very happy with the opportunity of playing and doing some of our own touring. in sort of club level shows, anything between about 250 to 450 size, and being invited to do support slots like the ones we did with the Fields of the Nephilim and the Mission, and Kirk Brandon's Spear of Destiny and Theatre of Hate, and also doing things like the Whitby Goth Festival and, the sort of multi-band bill sort of approach to kind of indoor festivaling. So,
Yes, well, it's a lot nicer than being in a muddy field.
yeah,
Yeah, so these kind of weekend events look really nice. Have you enjoyed sort of that kind of community spirit of
yeah, yeah,
being part of a sort of a scene? I mean, is it also nice bumping into the bands from that period as well and sort of swapping stories?
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
it a little bit of a mutual sort of yes, a sort of support
It's a, it's
network
a
as well?
it's the buddy system, isn't it? And it's people that you've seen in different guises throughout the years in different places, and some of the actual some of the playing that we've done is things that I've actually put together myself. I recently put together the Kindred Spirit Sunday kind of sort of day fest and invited Anne Marie and Ghost Dance and invited Phil Morris and Rose of Avalanche to come and play with us in a very, collegiate and collective way where everybody was treated the same. We all did the same length of set. We all got paid the same money, which is important, and everyone had this, of course, there has to be a running order. You can't all play at the same time. But between us, we were able to come to an agreement about how that should look and how we should, and the idea was we would all put the same amount of energy in to kind of promoting it. It's almost like a kind of hippie vibe. It's almost taking us back to the days of Alice in Wonderland and, hey man, we're all in this together. It's like kind of, it's a community. We're part of a community of bands, and Christian, is I see as being part of that. Claytown Troop are all part of this kind of group of bands who have had moments in the sunshine, who have been responsible for some great music, who are around and are keen and have the energy to want to play. And
Yes.
I'm just hoping that I can do some more of those. I've got another one coming up with Skeletal Family, Wasted Youth, and us that I'm putting on down at the Concord 2. Same format, same idea. A Sunday, afternoon, late afternoon, early evening kind of day fest. In exactly the same, equal billing, equal everything. Kind of type of vibe. Keep the ticket price reasonable, so it's 20 quid for a ticket. I'm selling it to you. I feel like I'm a
Yes,
salesman
no,
now. But that's
I just really think that's such a great idea. I was kind of like, well, yes, of course, this is the future, isn't it?
yeah,
Really, I mean, and
and it,
also just what I was just going to say, it also gives you all a chance to be able to probably swap a few stories about how you're able to navigate some of the sort of issues that probably one or two of the band have had to sort of
yeah,
just asking about, how do you deal with sort of, I don't know, Bandcamp, or how do you sort of deal with merchandising, or how do you deal with visas? I guess there's always a few questions about that you can always, and also I know with Anne Marie, is it Anne from Ghost Dance? I mean, I think
yeah,
she's had sort of trying to find members of a band to back her has been quite a tricky one, because I think people can't always commit to be in a band and give that much time. And so I think, because I did an interview with her last year, and it was it sounded really tricky because she's passionate, but again, it's not that easy to suddenly conjure up a whole 3-piece, 4-piece band, isn't it? Sometimes.
yeah. I know, and we were having chats when we were playing, in back in November with them, and yeah, Anne Marie, she is genuinely, she is genuinely alternative rock royalty, isn't she? She was there before even we started,
Well,
with when
absolutely.
Skeleton Families first started.
I
You
know
know,
it is, yeah, I know. And it's just really incredible. Like I said, when I was during that period, you couldn't always listen to all the music coming out because it was just not, you just couldn't have a quick listen, you couldn't stream it. And so there was a lot of albums that just kind of drifted by or just shot by, and you just listen to whatever you can. But then decades later, you can catch up and listen to all these things you missed. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is... So when I listen back to the 80s, it isn't the albums I know, because you sort of think, yeah, I've heard that enough. But actually, it's all the ones that you missed, or I don't know. And it was also quite tribal, I have to confess. There's a little bit of tribalism. There was a lot of tribalism, wasn't there? So,
Yeah, there was, yeah.
you did stick to one thing. I wasn't a big New Romantic fan, but no, I think, God, Depeche Mode, so good. And sometimes, I must admit, sometimes goth, I was a little bit uncomfortable with goth, but now I think, oh, it's fantastic. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's just a label,
Yeah.
I know, but at the same time, one is a bit self-conscious with these things. God.
Yeah, and look, but it even played out when those bands played live as well. I mean, I can actually, I always enjoyed the Westworld album by Theatre of Hate, but I could never go to a Theatre of Hate gig because it was just too macho. There was too many people just, living out some kind of like sort of, you know, idea that they all had to have the closest thing to a fight, on the dance floor every time they played. It was like I just couldn't go along and see them. But now I get the chance to go and see them. Maybe partly because some of those guys have all got a bit older now, and they can't quite manage the same amount of sort of physical exertion. But I get to hear the band play the bloody music. It's like I couldn't do before.
Yes, absolutely. So then, are you back in the studio then, recording a new studio album?
Well, we're doing what we did way back in the day. We're doing 4-track EPs. We did one and released it in November 24, called Forces of Evil. And we did 2 videos for that. And yeah, I mean, that went really well. And, you know, lots of good feedback on it. The videos picked up a lot of interest in terms of views. We're back in the game. We're making new music. There are people who are coming along to the show, and they're expecting and wanting to hear that new music because they like it. They've bought the single, they've heard the song, they think it's a good they think the good songs are good, and we're able to play some new material in the set. It makes a big difference.
Yes. Well, it's very exciting.
It's impossible, isn't it? No matter how much you like your own stuff, you can't keep playing the same song over and over and over and over and over again with the same amount of enthusiasm. You've got to have some new material there just to make life interesting for yourself.
Well, I would imagine from your classical background, you must always be looking for you must have a rich palette of styles that you can draw on. So you would be frustrated if you didn't have the
Yeah,
opportunity to
yeah,
do something
yeah,
new, or incorporate something quite interesting. I mean, it's quite interesting because Boz Bora, I was talking to him, and he was just saying that, I had no idea, but he had a bit of a classical background, which obviously he can then bring into whoever he's playing with. And you think, oh, that's why some bands probably have got a more interesting sound, because obviously they've got the repertoire, or they've got the skill, or the knowledge to be able to put in
yeah,
those little magic moments, as us listeners kind of go, oh, that's a really clever bit.
yeah, yeah,
And so, yes, it must be quite interesting to be able to
yeah.
sort of get in the
Or
studio and work.
attempting to kind of move the things you're creating into slightly different places other than the sort of box that people are expecting it to sit in. Um, you know, uh, because I mean, it's all of those things, isn't it? It is knowledge. It's having this breadth of knowledge that I've picked up from my studies as a music college, and learning classical music as alongside contemporary popular music, rock music, whatever you call it. It's about having a level of skill and ability to be able to challenge yourself to play things. You're not having to, you're not limited by the fact that you can only play in one particular style really well. You know, and having your curiosity to want to see how different things can fit together, to try and at least, find fusions there that may not have existed, just to see if that works.
Yes. So when with the sort of with sort of writing then, because obviously when you're young, there's an awful lot of, well, not a lot, but there's certain topics you can sort of draw on, or certain experiences. But as we get older, there's even more. How do you try to then put that in a song without it sounding a bit too sincere, or, like with The Cure or even David Bowie's last album? I mean, do you
Yeah,
find, there's the bigger subjects than, oh God, I've just fallen in love. Isn't this really exciting? No, whoops, no, she's broke my heart sort of songs to,
yeah.
dealing with other subjects, which are like, yeah, yeah, as I mentioned, The Cure and David Bowie. Do you sort of when you look at a certain subject, do you start with an idea that you would like to sing about or write about something that's quite a big subject or a heavy subject that you find? How do you do justice to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is it's a fine line that you tread, isn't it? You know, the Forces of Evil track was something that had existed for us a little while back, in our past. In fact, almost right at the very start of our existence, in a form with some lyrical content written, but it chimed in with what we were thinking about, or what I was thinking about, what Mark was thinking about sort of this whole sort of religious intolerance kind of agenda, and how that manifests itself, and my own personal feeling about organized religions basically being ways of manipulating people. And I wouldn't call myself an atheist. I think I have a spiritual kind of feeling about life, and of course, I would like to imagine that there is something beyond the period we're living through. We go to something else afterwards. But I just can't see how organized religion is it, and how organized religion always seems to have a part to play in the background of why people abuse, and go to war with each other. Although of course there are geopolitical kind of sort of issues as well, that people are always dragged into it on the basis of their religious kind of sort of commitments. So yeah,
Yes.
I mean, how do you get that right without making it sound too preachy, or did I get it right? I don't know. I think I did. I think people listen
Yeah.
to the track and think it makes a point without it being too much like we're wagging a big finger. It's like
Yes. Well, as the creative songwriter, yes, you must have hours of hours and hours of fun thinking that. So, what are you working on at the moment, and when are you expected to have that released or available?
yeah, we just literally finished 4 more songs for the next EP that we're going to have out in May. We've got some shows that we're doing right at the start of May to support the release. So that release will come out then. And we are doing a couple of sort of indoor festival shows throughout the summer. We're playing in Edinburgh at the Dedinburgh Festival.
I know
And
such a great lineup.
yeah, yeah. And we're also then putting together uh, a 40th anniversary a tour to celebrate the 40th anniversary of The Great Story Ever Told, which will be
Uh,
at the end of the year.
yes, my God. So that's yes. So and are you planning any dates in Europe at all? Do you have any sort of
No, not really. No, I mean, to a certain extent, we have been asked, but I think that, like I was saying to you earlier, we're sort of kind of okay with the level of visibility and the level of work that we are doing in terms of the band. It's nice to be able to be invited to do some really interesting shows. It's nice to be able to go out on the headline tour in club shows up and down the country. It's nice to release material and people buy it, and people outside of the UK are buying the material as well. It's not like it's just singularly the UK, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot of organisation and a lot of initial outlay to get you from the UK into Germany or Italy,
Yes.
or there's a whole there's a whole load of things that need to be sort of thought about in order to get that to happen,
Yes.
and we're not completely worried about having to do that.
Quite. Yes, there's probably far too many Excel spreadsheets to think about. Too many. Yes, I know. Yes, I mean, God, traveling is. When you're young, it doesn't seem that big a thing, doesn't it? But now you just think, oh my God, that's a lot more to it than.
Well,
And
and when you're young, you're just a person playing. You literally go. The guy comes over and goes, right, get in the tour bus, off we go. There's somebody else doing all that background work for you, and actually, you couldn't care less what the finance situation is, what the whether how you've had to get from A to B or any of that. You just want to get on the bus, get poured out at the end for the sound check, do your sound check, play the show, party afterwards. Go to the hotel, sleep it off, get in the bus the next day. That's it. You couldn't care less. Once you start to get a bit older, you start to go, oh, could we, is there some way we could have made this a bit, easier, or made a bit more money, or done a bit of this? You're less careless about it, aren't you?
well, absolutely, yes. I remember, yes, quite a few people. It's like I've got a bit of a dodgy back now. I can't just sleep in
Yeah,
a bad transit. I need a proper mattress, otherwise I'm going to be completely crippled. So,
yeah.
yes,
I know, yeah.
these things do happen, and it's like I can't just take a chance. And yes, and there's other issues that I know people committing to a month away, and then they might have parents that aren't feeling that great, and you're thinking, oh God, this is too much. I can't afford that
Yeah.
risk, really. So yeah, I know it's the joy. There's so many ideas you could have for writing a song about these angsty problems, can't you? Yes. Yeah, I know it's weird, isn't it? But look, well, thank you ever so much for your time. This has been amazing. And if you want, I can always send you the link, and you can always put it on any of your social media platform sites, as we do. But
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Send me the link, and I will definitely promote it. All over
yes.
our Insta and Facebook, and I've also got a TikTok account.
Oh,
We haven't got a
excellent.
band TikTok account. I do my own TikTok because I don't know that we're going to influence many people as a band on that, so I just do stupid things on TikTok. But yeah, look, it'd be great. Send me
Okay,
whatever
I
links you've
will.
got, and I'll definitely promote it.
Brilliant. Well,
Well, it's been
thank
great
you.
having a chat with you. Thanks very much for doing it.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. And yes, best of luck for the year. Okay, see you later. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. You probably guessed that. Anyway, a massive thank you to Jim for giving me the time for that interview. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 show. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Have a great week. Stay safe.